Well, there's this, I don't know, man. These athletes are crazy. There's an Australian guy who broke his finger, field hockey player, broke his finger 2 weeks ago, and he couldn't play, so he decided to amputate the finger so he could
Oh,
play.
really? Wow.
Yeah, so I mean, you experience it, and I've been to one event so far, and you look at it. I mean, this is the moment of their lives, you know. So
Yeah.
I don't know if that. I haven't been in a situation like that. I think our work happens more progressively, but
But
you know.
yeah, I mean, if you're not in the major sports, like where there's a pro league, where there are like larger
Yeah.
cups and like huge salaries,
Like
if
the
you're not
Olympic, the
in
real
that,
Olympic
yeah.
sports, yeah.
Yeah, if you're not in that, then like Olympics is your moment to shine. It's like
Exactly,
the apex of
yeah.
your career. So
And it only happens every 4 years. You only get so many opportunities.
Yeah,
of course,
Especially since there's like a age cap on certain sports where past
Mhm.
which you're out of your peak and it's much tougher for you to compete.
No, but I mean, I feel like it's the same thing for the city itself. If you think about Tokyo, you know, I'm here in Paris, and all I can think about is, you know, it's pretty amazing the amount of work that goes into an event like this. And
Mhm.
Tokyo did all that preparation. They built all the stuff. They got all ready, and they couldn't really have a real Olympics. I mean, it was completely just neutered because you couldn't have people there, you know, and they would have done a really good job because, you know, Japanese know how to manage things and organize things. So, you know, it is quite an interesting event because it's 17, 16 days, but it takes 8 years to prepare for.
hmm Well, if it only takes 8 years, that'll be a standard length. I mean, it takes like some cities, they prepare for that moment for like 20, 30 years.
Yeah, that's true. If you think about the bid process and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, look, guys, I mean, maybe you've gathered it, our listeners have gathered it right now. We're talking about the Olympics this episode. Hopefully people are enjoying the games. I'm currently in Paris, so it's trying to give some firsthand account of what it's like and talk a little bit about the impact of Olympics on cities, the planning that goes into it, the actual physical development that occurs during the event, and then also the economics behind it. How do you make the return worthwhile? So,
Yeah, so you're in Paris. What do you see? What's the eyes on the ground report?
well, I have to say, I was really skeptical. I think part of it was it's been since 2016, since we've had a real full Summer Olympics, the so-called 2020 Olympics in Tokyo, which took place in 2021, where people couldn't travel, they couldn't attend the games. I mean, it was fun to watch on TV, but it didn't feel the same. And, you know, and then the Rio Olympics before that in 2016, I didn't go there, but there was a lot that I guess didn't go quite as planned. It was kind of a little bit messy of an event. I would have to say so far it's day 2 right now, or it's Sunday on the first weekend of the games. I think it's a real success, to be honest. I think the planning is really strong. Everything is really well organized. Everything is done on app, basically. So your tickets are all on your apps. The planning and the sort of finding can be done on apps. So it's really efficient, and it takes advantage. I think what makes it feel good is it really takes advantage of the city, the host city itself. So, you know, I'm familiar with Paris. I've been here a lot. I spent some time here in school, and if you're familiar with the city, it's easy to get around, and you don't really have to do much, kind of out of the ordinary. I constantly look at the map with all the venues, and it's really well dispersed. So, you know, you have events that are happening in the center of the city. You have events that are happening on the outskirts a little bit, in some of the larger arenas, but also some events that are happening like cycling, for instance. So I ran into a friend of my friends here who he's a Paris local, and he actually wasn't planning to attend any of the events, but he wound up going to cycling because it was free. And he said, well, I actually really enjoyed it, so I'm going to go get some tickets for other events. So I think the momentum and the sort of energy around it is building in a positive way. I think people's expectations pretty low, but it's starting to surpass it.
Well, it's good to hear that the density is manageable, because I thought like it will be crowded. Because think about like Paris in usual days, and it's summer, and it's like a vacation destination. So yeah, but it's good to hear that they're managing it very well, and I think it's different from what I expected.
Actually, that's the most surprising thing, is it's actually really not that crowded. I think that was what was a lot of people were maybe scared about, and maybe why there aren't that many people, because they all kind of spook themselves. From what I understand, there's a lot of locals who are actually just not here. They skip town, especially the older ones. I think they wanted to avoid these crowds. They wanted to avoid the hassle. And it's also a tradition for Parisians to leave in July or August for a long period of time, take their long summer break. So it's not surprising from that angle, but it is surprising from the fact that sometimes I walk down the street and you would never know that if you're not really close to the venue, that there's this big event happening. I think it's a bit noticeable because you'll see cars, for instance, that are official Olympic cars where, sometimes they're branded by the particular delegation. So maybe they're moving officials around, or you see people wearing their nation's paraphernalia. But other than that, there's some regions where it just feels like it's a normal summer day in Paris, kids playing around and people walking around. So in that sense, it's a little bit odd, but it makes the experience actually really great because you're not constantly fighting.
I guess, are the events
battles
well attended, the ones that you've gone to?
Well, I've been to the beach volleyball, which is, I think it's the iconic event for this Olympics, which is because they created a stadium right next to the Eiffel Tower. So when I was watching it, I was watching the event in front of me. It was women's China versus Australia, which was actually really riveting. Went down to the final point, not Australia won. And then men's Brazil versus Morocco, which was a little bit more lopsided. Brazil was very strong. But you're watching this event in front, and then right behind you is the Eiffel Tower, right there. And I think that was just one of the coolest things possible. That was very well attended. Everyone was there, even despite the fact that on that day, Saturday, it was raining quite hard. Not hard, but it was not. It was cloudy and it was wet basically. But I'm watching some of these events on TV, and they seem to be quite well attended. I think they've sold something like 8 million tickets overall, but there's still something like 250,000 to 500,000 tickets available. So not everything is completely sold out, but there is some flexibility there. But it's interesting too, because this is the first time you go that I've been to an event where it happens over multiple days. Sometimes you just go to a basketball game or a football game, and it's like, okay, the game happened, it's over. And here you go to one, then you expect the other. I'm going to, I think, 6 total: rugby, basketball, athletics, water polo, things like that. I mean, just sports I'd never attend. So I'll get back to you on how well attended those were. But overall, it seems like there's a good amount of interest.
You talked a little bit about how the density is distributed, how you're able to kind of get from place to place, and it's not as crowded as it seems. So, what about the organization makes it so that you do get these filled up crowds, these well-attended events, but you don't feel the pressure on the city's infrastructure?
Well, one, I think that if you look at the map, the venues are pretty well dispersed. And I would say that overall, it's like a larger discussion about why I think Paris is the ideal city for this sort of event. I think the density and the scale is really manageable. Paris itself, what you call, the traditional Paris, which is within the périphérique, it's not that big, actually. I don't know the exact dimensions, but it doesn't really take that long to get across if you're going by metro or by car. It's about 2 million people live within that region, and then 13 million people total live within the Grand Paris. So most of those events are within that smaller region, and you take the metro, and it's very easy to get to. Right? I mean, Paris is already very, very well served by public transportation. I took the bus today, as well as the metro, and you can walk around and you can take bikes and things like that. So I think part of it is that everyone is well distributed. It's not, and also the city itself is not a place where you have one, say, place where all the hotels or all the hospitality is. It's kind of dispersed, and that's partially because I think the arrondissement arrangement, which they sort of function as something larger than a neighborhood, more official than a neighborhood, but smaller than a city itself. So for instance, each arrondissement has their own viewing sort of garden or event that's happening there, where they have a big screen and you have picnic tables and people can sit and play. And so in that regard, it feels quite campus-like in a way. And yeah, I mean, I think it's a tribute to the city itself, the way that it's already functioned. So
using the existing infrastructure was also, to me, like just imagining and also seeing photos was a quite, Paris itself is an iconic city.
Exactly.
And having like sports events that blended together was looking fantastic and fascinating. Like they have also professional events like the sports games in Seine, and also like in Grand Palais, they're going to have this fencing match. And they're using this public spaces to host these type of sports events, which I think is quite fascinating. And I don't know if it was done before, maybe in London. But Olympics are used to be known as events to facilitate cities to fast track and infrastructure development, new residential development, whatever it may be. But Paris is like an old city, and I assume that there's going to be tons of regulations kind of controlling this new input of new development and new structures. So I'm curious, since you're there, have you seen, and you've been there before, have you seen anything, any like new structures that's prepared for this, or does it like pretty much the same, but maybe it's the use that changed, or are they building outside of of Paris, like somewhere close by?
Yeah, so it's very hard to build within the periphery in general. So I'm looking out at Paris right now. There's nothing new really coming up. You know, Paris is pretty much capped at a certain height. Nothing can be too tall except for certain buildings, particularly the Eiffel Tower, Arc de Triomphe, things like that. They have built, I think the iconic building that they built so far is the new Aquatic Center, but that's outside the main kind of Paris city. So especially it's easier because there's also more space there.
Right.
To be honest, it looks like the same old Paris. One thing that stopped, I'll have to say, it's actually made the experience really good, is you can't do any construction right now. So there's no scaffolding, for instance, except for on like Notre Dame, because there's undergoing renovations right now. But even my friend was telling me that the Eiffel Tower, usually there's scaffolding on one portion because they have to fix or they have to paint a certain portion at any given time. And at this point, there's none. So everything is really clean. Everything is really well kept. And it feels like as you walk around, you're just kind of experiencing Paris as it is, but it's just been transformed into to host this event, which I think honestly just feels great in a way. I don't know if it's the architect in me that appreciates the ability to adapt things to new and better uses, or if it just feels natural because Paris is already such an iconic and beautiful city. I think you can't really do that in a lot of places, to be honest. And that's why it's particularly well suited for this event here.
I think one of the things we were talking about earlier is like how this is what you said, like the cheapest Olympics in a long time. I think one of the things that kind of goes into that is these like temporary and using existing venues. And one of the big things that happen to Olympic cities is that after the Olympics, the stadiums and things like they have to be maintained, but they're underutilized. So it's this ongoing operating cost that the city has to take on. So I guess for the new venues like the Aquatic Center or like the Olympic Village, like what is the planned use case after the Olympics?
To be honest, I'm not too sure about that. I mean, I think the Aquatic Center is something that will continue to be used as I would imagine would be continue to be used as a kind of event space for aquatic competitions. I know the one in Beijing basically became a public pool, which is crazy.
Nice. That's also nice. Olympic sized pool for the public. Nice.
I mean, Paris, I think, has that reputation already as being a center for a lot of things. So you don't worry about things becoming obsolete later on. I think there will be uses for it later. Minkyu, I think you do know a little bit about the village, though, right? You were saying that they have
so I did. Yeah, I did some research, and usually if you're hosting an Olympic, there's this Olympic village that you build for the athletes to stay, and we've been hearing a lot of news about not having air conditioning and this building being designed to be naturally ventilated and also to do net zero. There were these concerns that they are athletes and this is like their lifetime achievement moments, and they need to be at their 100%, but wouldn't that kind of influence countries, whether some countries are providing portable air conditioning, some are not? Like, isn't there discrimination here? And even the beds are there, it's like an improved paper bed that they utilize in Tokyo, but I heard that they're getting better. So usually Olympics, because it is again a tool to fast track infrastructure and to do more development, to be to be photographed basically and get published throughout the world. For instance, in 1992 in the Barcelona Olympics, they've been prepping for this moment, like investing a lot in revitalizing the city, since the 70s, and they've been working on cleaning up the water, like building new infrastructure, the transportation systems, housing. But after a successful Olympic, the downfall was that because they've invested so much in the city's improvements, now the affordability became a huge issue. And this is in early 90s, and even then it became an issue. But now affordability of housing and the affordability of living in the cities are already quite high. So there's this concerns that if the city is investing so much in its improvements, like the taxpayers and the industry that needs to live with those changes are the ones who are probably have to be paying for those upgrades and paying for those like new and shiny buildings, and often cases, the ones who can't who can't afford these gets kind of pushed out to outside the cities. So there's this issue about what is Olympics actually giving to the city other than publicity. But in France, in Paris's case, I've read that they're building this Olympic town nearby in Saint-Denis, and they're allocating like 1.5 billion of their funds to actually develop mixed-use housing. And although it's used now as a Olympic town, it can be easily converted to a different use that will host more affordable housing, more event spaces, office spaces. So basically, the city using this as a tool to develop close by cities that can help the general economic situation of the country, which I think is a good change.
Yeah, you get a lot of pushback. We've seen, I think it was pretty acute in Rio in 2016, people saying, why are we spending this so much on this event that to show the world when we can't even afford, things that will, basic services and amenities that we need throughout in general. I mean, I think the Olympics it's an economic wager, but it's also in a lot of places a political wager where you have to make sure that you appease or at least you accommodate the people that support you if you're a politician who's advocating for this, and make sure that they're happy. I think in this case, the French, I think they would all admit that they're not the easiest to please all the time. And so part of, I would guess the economic wager and the political wager were kind of aligned here. Like, let's not spend too much on this and make sure our return can be maximized even if our input is not that high.
Things like the Olympic Village, right? It's a little bit easier to reuse. It's pretty normal things like housing, commercial, things that can easily be reused, but things like public transportation and stadiums are much harder. I think if you look at like Sochi, even Rio, like the new public transportation that was built is connecting two ends that are only really utilized during the Olympics. It's not serving the broader population. I think that's where, especially for locals, a lot of the notion of where's our return for all the tax dollars and all the sacrifices we're making to put on these games are, right? Because after this big event, your city gets super crowded, you're spending a bunch of money, but nothing improves. I guess like in the Barcelona case, it gets worse, right? You're pushed out in terms of affordability.
So it comes down to a simple question: what is Olympics worth? Like, what does it do for a city? Is it good or bad?
Well, I think it's contextual, and I think as we notice that different cities are changing very drastically. I mean, you have certain types of cities in some contexts that are striving for one thing and others that are striving for others. I think the wager becomes very different. And I think that's sort of where the IOC is in a little bit of a conundrum, because I think the value for an Olympics is very different. I would put them in two camps. I think there's the established cities. So in this case, Paris for sure, London 2012, Los Angeles 2028. They've all hosted the Olympics before. Tokyo as well, 2020. They all hosted the Olympics before. They know they have infrastructure that's developed. They have a lot of support. They have kind of money to pay for it. And then there's the emerging cities. So in that case, I would say Rio, Sochi, Beijing, 2008. Brisbane is a sort of an interesting one where it's in an established market for the Olympics, but it has never hosted it before. I think the two motivations from either camp are very different. And in the case of the emerging city, it's more sort of publicity. It's more sort of saying we are here, either through the fact that you have an international acknowledgement on the highest stage, or through the fact that through holding the Olympics, you will need to build a new airport, you will need to add metro lines, you will need to build housing and all this infrastructure. For the established cities, and I think Paris is the sort of pinnacle of that. I mean, Paris doesn't need to advertise itself as a place to come visit as a tourist. It already gets the most tourists per year of any place in the world. So, what they're trying to get out of it, not quite sure. I mean, if you speak to, some of my friends think that maybe the goal is for a little bit more national unity, like that you can have something to come together around.
Well, it is for sure. When you host an Olympic, there's this rush of national pride, right? Like, it's your city. And also like advantages for the athletes as well. Like, you get more quota because you're a hosting country. Your athletes, your country's athletes get to attend more of those events. And also in terms of the developing countries, like I think a prime example is actually 1988 Seoul Olympics. And Seoul, as a mega city as it is now, was basically established because of those infrastructural investments that happened around this time. Like the whole part of the city on the east, Jamshir, was all developed, and also the major artery highways that connects throughout, like north, south, east, west of the city became all developed just for this event. And the rest is history. After this event, Korea became on the map, and now like look at all these publications around its culture. So I think it has its effect, but like you said, Alex, for the more established countries, does it really bring the same amount of profit? Or I mean, I just can't think if there will be any profit for the city. Like, it's all debt.
I mean, like when you host a party by yourself, are you looking to recoup your profit? Not really. You're trying to have a good time. I mean, there's some value in that down the line, right? Like you gain social credibility, but it's not necessarily financial credibility. I mean, this is probably the biggest party you can have. World Cup rivals it as well, but it's sort of on that sort of mentality, I would say, right now.
Yeah.
I don't think it can be the clear sort of ROI, if we have an Olympics, we'll get this much return, is happening anymore.
Well, I think the ROI that is happening right now, I see LVMH being the largest beneficiary of this event. Like, they own so many brands, and if you don't know about LVMH, just search Arnault, the CEO.
I think they're gonna sell more Olympic handbags.
Sorry, Bernard Arnault, not Pierre, Bernard.
Yeah. I mean, look at their Louis Vuitton is designing all the boxes that carries the medals, and the medals are made by the jeweler Chaumet, or like some other high-end jeweler that's also part of LVMH. And all the fashion the athletes are wearing, the branding, even the videos, so on and so forth. But it's also you can't really say that it's all commercial, right? Because luxury brands, luxury culture, design, it's all embedded in what Paris stands for.
Yeah.
So like
it's
where
French
is the
culture.
line? Yeah, it is French culture, but it's all owned by one company. So is the company paying for the Olympic? Is it the LVMH party?
That's the crazy thing. I don't know the sort of inner workings of that, but if you walk around Paris, like everything has some connection to LVMH right now. Obviously, Louis Vuitton, Moet, Hennessy, so food and drink, luxury bags, but they've been acquiring brands all over. I mean, geez, I was in New Zealand. My wife is from New Zealand. We went to wine country down there, and we went to wine tasting, and our favorite brand, we found out, was owned by LVMH. Like they have this global reach, and ever since the pandemic, for some reason, luxury is just on the rise. So, I mean, I don't know the actual specifics or the finances or economics about it, but I think Paris is just an LVMH. It's run by LVMH in that sense. And think about the product that they're going to move. People come here buying Rimowa suitcases, buying Dior, buying all these things, and taking it back to where they're from. So it's a pretty good venture for them if that's the case.
Well, it could have been even better if like Paris as a city was tax-free during the Olympic times.
It's in the EU. It is tax-free in terms of you buy stuff, you can get tax reimbursed if you leave the EU, if you have a non-EU passport. So it's a good time to do some shopping, actually.
Yeah, I guess that's why a couple of my friends are there.
Yeah, but I mean, the ROI is interesting. I'm looking at a chart right here that's basically saying, Rio, I mean, this is a little bit the two topics we were talking about before. Rio had predicted or estimated that their Olympics was going to cost about $5 billion, and it turned out to cost over $20 billion. So understandably, there was a lot of upset about that. More recently, Beijing, it seems to me, was kind of right on target. Maybe that has something to do with the organizers' ability to authorize certain things at a certain price. But I mean, the charts, you can look them up. Olympics never come in under budget. It just goes without saying. And I think that I'm looking at this from back to 1992 Barcelona. Like, people know that these days. Someone's gonna have to foot the bill some way. So I don't know if they're able to do that with corporate sponsorships these days, or if there's other ways that you can foot it. But like I said, this is the first Olympics since Sydney that's under $10 billion, which is quite remarkable. I think that's probably a good thing, actually.
I think I was reading the average is like 195% over budget, right? It seems like this consistent pattern of bidding low and then spending more money, which I guess isn't that different from a lot of government infrastructure projects that we know of. I think the Olympics might just be one of the things that brings a lot of attention to it. And maybe this is part of the change that the IOC is trying to make, is all this over budget stuff is in a way tarnishing the IOC's image when maybe they don't have as much control over the budget as the city governments and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's another factor here too, which is this is 2024. We're a quarter of the way into the 21st century. It's not like there are a ton of cities out there that would be capable of hosting the Olympics that don't have the infrastructure to host them in the first place. I'm thinking back to Beijing when they won it in 2002, when they won the bid. They only had 2 subway lines. And by the time the Olympics started in 2008, they had upwards of 10, and now they have like 20. So cities have been developing naturally at the same time. So maybe it is a moment where the Olympics doesn't need to be the catalyst for infrastructure development or for things happening. Like Riyadh is trying to get the Olympics in 2036. They can build that stuff now anyway. They don't need the Olympics to happen in order to make those investments occur. So part of it is sort of like just development that's occurring these days. But so maybe one thing that host cities are looking for is still that sort of notoriety or that prestige. But in the case of Paris, I'd say they're trying to make the case that they can have the lightest Olympics possible. So sustainability, both in terms of having cardboard beds that you can recycle, not having air conditioning, which is also very culturally specific. I mean, none of the apartments here have air conditioning, and that's typically Parisian when it gets above 30 degrees. But also to say that you can take advantage of the existing amenity and you don't have to add too much to it.
Yeah, I do think it is definitely a way to go. I mean, especially the capital market now is like probably very different from. I mean, I don't know if they even care about the capital markets. Maybe just spending without a limit has. I think have hit that limit for several times, and people. I mean, Olympics were a beacon of globalization. That's how I feel it, and it has been a magnifier of what the city stands for, and also like putting that city on the map. And that alone is a huge impact for especially developing countries. But when it comes to more established cities, of course, you have those infrastructure already there, and I think it is representing a shift from what's new and shiny to what is more of a sustainable and more joined reusing of its existings. But still, it is a proof that it still works, and you don't really need to build all new shiny stuff to represent who you are. But the things that you have already established in your rich history can be actively utilized as part of the city. So,
which is why I keep on wondering, Libo, maybe you can have an opinion about this. How come New York has never hosted the Olympics?
No space.
I don't think New Yorkers have the patience for that.
Right.
Like they would probably revolt. I mean, I don't know. Like New York has the stadiums and New York has the infrastructure, but it's probably not going to be the nicest place to be for everyone. I don't know. Maybe. Well, I guess this might be throwing some shade, but maybe the tri-state area governments don't want to bribe the IOC to win their bid.
Well, there was an article out a couple of days back. What if Boston won the Olympics? Boston,
they've been trying for a while, yeah. Yeah,
compared to New York, has a better chance because it's not that much constrained by the edge of an island. It has a center, but it has enough space to become more of a sprawl type of development. And there are rivers, of course, but it's not like bounding the entire footprint of the city like Manhattan does. So I think there are places that they plan for it, but of course, like I think the public engagement process, like any type of development, will be probably very brutal and will be very opinionated. It's amazing that Paris, which I think Parisians probably, I don't think they'll be less opinionated than Bostonians.
I think part of it is like cities, I guess regular citizens just don't really have the patience for that anymore, right? New York has a ton of issues. Boston has a ton of issues. I'm sure LA has a ton of issues. It's like, back to our point earlier, it's like if you're going to spend, I don't know, $10 billion, what would you get for that equivalent in terms of the improvement of the city if you didn't spend it on the Olympics?
So then, should these established cities just back off and give it more opportunities to the more kind of up and coming cities? What's the selection criteria?
Well, I think that's something that's actually changing recently, right? I think Paris and LA were the first time where two bids were awarded back to back. And they're moving to a closed selection process, so it's no longer kind of this open bid for the Olympics. And I think what they're trying to do is establish like host commissions to choose it more on a committee format. But one thing that I did hear is that less and less cities have been bidding. So it is a problem that the IOC is facing in terms of the long-term health of the Olympics, is that cities are not jumping at the opportunity to host the Olympics anymore.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen it with the Winter Olympics. I think both Sochi and Beijing were not necessarily, they were picked out of a very small group of applicants. Yeah, it's very hard to make the case these days, but one thing I would say is I think there is and this is maybe as it relates to design too, there's like vibes, there's sentiment, there's good feelings that can come out of this sort of thing, but it's really hard to underwrite that.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, if I'm looking at a list of 2036 Olympic bids, I would say it's mostly what we were describing as the sort of the emerging cities. So there's confirmed bids from Nusantara, Indonesia, which is the new capital. They're moving it from Jakarta, Istanbul, somewhere in India, and then Santiago. And then potential bids in somewhere in Egypt, potentially one more time. China is trying to go with Chengdu, Chongqing, a dual city. And that's also something that seems to be having some traction, is like, do you need to host everything in one city, or can you have a little bit of sharing responsibility, which has been done in the World Cup before, for instance, across countries.
Yeah, Korea, Japan.
Yeah. Doha, who, Qatar just hosted the World Cup, and then Riyadh. I thought that might be the case, that some Middle Eastern countries are going to go for it. The problem with that is that you can't host the Olympics outdoors in Saudi Arabia in the middle of August. It's going to be crazy hot. So what do they do? Are they going to have to build a bunch of stadiums, or are they going to move it to December like they did with the World Cup? I don't know if that's feasible, Budapest and Hungary, some coalition between Florence and Bologna, Copenhagen, which I think is, again, a kind of small, digestible city that could work quite well, but I don't know if the economy is too small. Toronto, Montreal was quite interesting. Montreal has hosted the Olympics before, and I think Toronto is a sort of world city that has the cachet. But the one that stuck out to me, and actually when I was thinking about this in my mind, which cities might be available to host in 2036, the one that I think has the best chance and jumped out to me right away when it was actually confirmed that there's a potential bid in the works is for Berlin. I think that the European city, as I'm here, it works really well because there's a certain density where, again, it's walkable, it's drivable, and it's bikeable, plus you have infrastructure for rail. So Berlin seems to be like that sort of city that I think, again, has the cachet, it has the space. It's in a country that is quite stable and generally reliable. And I think that, just there's something about the European city which suits this sort of event.
I think Berlin's also interesting in the way that when you kind of categorize, like other cities are pretty obvious in the two categories, like emerging or established cities, but Berlin has hosted the Olympics before, but in a very different time
context
in that country,
yes.
Right? So there is a reemergence, that kind of a reestablishing of the city that could occur with Berlin hosting it. And I think the other thing that's quite interesting is there is a lot of, I think, allegations of sports watching in terms of who gets picked for these host cities. It works in with the whole bribery and establishing yourself on the world stage things. And some of the countries on the list definitely has a part to play in some of that. So, I mean, it could go any which way.
Yeah, I wonder the correlation between the most corrupt countries and the Olympic budget. It's hard to believe that like some countries, their budget graph just spikes compared to other countries. And I just sense that there might be some correlation. like you need a lot of bribing, like every single step to get to build something, maybe.
I mean,
Well,
even
we always
Paris
hear
being
about
the
it.
cheapest in recent memory just got like their Olympic organizer offices just got raided
Oh,
for potential embezzlement of public funds and favoritism. So I mean, no host is exclusive to these things.
There's
yeah.
always going to be someone who's going to try to profit from a big event like this, either by giving kickbacks to sponsors or by simply, there's people who make this decision who where the Olympics goes, and there's a lot of money on the line with that. I mean, we hear it all the time with the World Cup, for instance. This was a big talking point in Qatar, actually. So it's always going to be a topic. I sort of think about it. You're never going to be completely clear of any allegations of corruption.
Yeah.
But I do think that one thing that some of these cities that we start to see emerging, and I try not to make it too political, but Paris, Los Angeles, Brisbane, if it were Berlin in 2036, I don't think they would be running on a platform of sort of national acclaim or recognition. It's, if you watch the opening ceremonies here, it was really about how diverse Paris is, how multicultural it is. It's already world city. People come here regardless from all different places. You can say the same about Los Angeles. Brisbane's a bit smaller, but it's also incredibly diverse. And it's sort of it's the most northern major city in Australia. And so it's very close to Asia, actually. Kind of an Asian city in that regard. And then, Berlin is just another sort of multicultural capital. So there is also the ability to promote against a sense of unity as opposed to a sense of exceptionalism. And I'm wondering how much of that goes into play, coupled with the advantages that existing cities have, or developed and established cities have, on the infrastructure and venue standpoint too.
The next Olympic that I'm really hopeful that I see within my lifetime is Pyongyang Olympics. Like that
would mean a
could
lot,
have
yeah.
it would mean a lot if that
Yeah.
happens, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm
It
going.
would.
Well, cut your check to the IOC to make it happen. Politics is inevitably involved in the Olympics. There has been some pretty significant events that have occurred in the past that happened during the Olympics because there's so many eyes watching that's very politically motivated. And I think it's interesting, Alex, that when you talked about the opening ceremonies, like it's really emphasis on diversity and unity, because I think leading up to the Olympics, especially in France and many parts of Europe, that lack of unity has been a significant issue, right?
Macron called a parliamentary election and out of the blue, and it was, kind of the far right was sort of beaten back by a coalition of moderates and progressives, but it was fraught because there is not a lot of political accord here, like there isn't in a lot of Western countries. Who knows what will happen? I was talking to my friends here and I was saying, I think you'll really understand the impact of this event in about 3 or 4 months, in my opinion. One thing I was to say is going really well is people are really nice right now. And Paris is not known for being particularly hospitable to outsiders. It's a great place, and they're used to tourists, but they're also not used to being particularly welcoming. But everyone I've talked to is really nice, really friendly. And I don't know if that has to do with generations, because I was saying particularly the younger people are sticking around and the older people are kind of leaving a little bit. But I think it also has to do with the recognition that France is not the empire that it used to be. It's a major player in world events, but it's not the leader in a lot of cases. And, I think leaning into that is quite important. For instance, the amount of English that's spoken in cafes and in the street is much higher than it was 10 years ago. That's a generational thing, but it's also an understanding that Paris is now, could be considered the capital of Europe. I think London was before, but after Brexit, I don't know if that's the case anymore. It is a really important place. So,
it's good to hear that it's a refresher. It's actually a refresher to me that there are more people speaking English on the streets.
Well, you definitely hear it because there's people visiting from. I heard something like 500,000 Brits are coming for the event, and which brings up security too. I think there's 1,500 British military/police officers that are going to come kind of assist. So security is a huge thing here. Despite the fact that things are working really well, wherever you go, there is an armed presence, and it doesn't necessarily make you feel particularly good because you know what that indicates in terms of threat, but in terms of security, they're taking it extremely seriously. Like you couldn't even go close to the Eiffel Tower for when I got here on Thursday, you had to actually apply for a QR code, give your identification. The whole city was shut down in preparation. Now it's much more open, but you can tell that that's the other thing. And I think it sort of underlines the maybe a little bit of sentiment about underwriting the Olympics these days is not going necessarily for spectacle, but going for the sure thing is probably, more important than
the matureness in managing these huge events would be big.
But it's also what makes hosting it in this type of way, like within the city, a little bit more difficult. If you're building like an Olympic village somewhere with all the stadiums, like security is much easier to control. But if you're within a city, especially one that is quite old, there's a lot of things you have to take into account to make it secure. One of the things, as I was doing research, one of the guys was saying that really what they should do is have one Olympic city that just hosts it every 4 years, so that the infrastructure is used, it's easy to secure, that city will get a ton of practice in how to make things secure, right? And especially now when the events are a lot more televised, there is a lot more folks who are able to access it without being there, that maybe that's a good case going forward.
Yeah, but from the financial standpoint, of course, that makes total sense. But I think hearing you say that too maybe sort of underscores what I feel about the Olympics, which it's not really an economic or financial, stimulation thing. That's not the goal of the Olympics. The goal of the Olympics is to be a cultural event. It's really one of the few. I mean, it is the only event where you can have that much representation. Like even the World Cup, not every country gets to be in the World Cup. China's been in the World Cup, I think, one time. Ever?
That's because sorry
Hey,
to
you're just not
sorry
good
to
at
be straightforward,
football.
but it's because they're not good at football.
Yeah, well, exactly. But but here you have every country in the Olympic the opening ceremonies. You see them represented, and that's really cool. To be honest, even if it's just one or two athletes. So there is something that makes you feel like things are coming together. I mean, I've always followed the Olympics as just a sports fan and someone who likes to understand how the world works and see things happen.
Yeah.
I don't know how many other people feel that way, but it's really interesting.
Yeah, one thing to note for me about this Olympics is the fashion. Like the Mongolia teams, their clothing was just on point, so beautiful.
Yeah, it's really good. Yeah.
Like it was a real good blend with their classical, like traditional wear, which I have no knowledge of, with more contemporary kind of athletic wear.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's different ways to get recognition too. I think obviously winning is the most important thing, and I haven't seen the medal count lately, but the one Olympic team that I do follow besides the U.S. is the Hong Kong team, and I think they had only won 3 medals before Tokyo, and they won several in Tokyo, and they've already won 1 here. So there are and it's in fencing or it's in swimming, but it's not basketball necessarily. But even basketball, they're comparing this team to the U.S. team to the Dream Team. I think the Dream Team faced 6 NBA players in 1992 during the whole tournament, and there's something like 64 players in the current tournament not playing for Team USA. So the world is also kind of coming together in terms of people are emerging and representing their country, which is I think that's really fascinating and really optimistic.
Yeah, it's a powerful message. Like uniting people from different countries, like getting together, like cheering and like competing in fair grounds. I think it is a beautiful thing. So thank God, like just make it better. Don't think about money.
No, I mean, I keep on thinking what LA is going to do. Obviously, LA is completely the 180 in terms of context. It's much wider and it's more spread out, but it has a lot of opportunities because it's by the beach, it's urban, the weather's going to be good, it's easy to get to, generally speaking. I think there's other things that's going to have, and I think that's the other counter argument to having it in the one place every time is that the events change and the style changes in each place, and diversity is the spice of life. So in this sense,
too late
it's
for
cool
LA to start building public transportation, I guess.
Well, maybe we'll have robo taxis by then. Maybe that's the plan.
That would be awesome if this was the precipitating event for LA to get robo-taxis.
Well, I'm sure there will be a boost in something. Yeah.
Tech is there.
I don't know, are there any robo-taxis in Paris?
I haven't seen any, to be honest, and I haven't seen any in Europe since I've been here. I'm based mostly in San Francisco, where they're ubiquitous already. But what I'm saying is the tech is there. If you can make it in San Francisco, it's just about legislation and regulation allowing it in. So, I mean, Elon Musk will tell you that Tesla full self-driving is already good enough. But yeah, I mean,
one question I have about Paris, since you're there, how is the smell?
that's actually something. So in addition to people being really nice, in addition to it being not too crowded, and like I mentioned already, sort of, it's very clean right now. You can tell, and there's a little bit of controversy about this too. You don't see hawkers, you don't see people peddling like trinkets and keychains and things like that. No one's selling fake handbags. It's been cleaned up in that regard, but it's also been cleaned up physically. Like everything is ultra clean, everything is shiny. Construction, like I said, is at a bare minimum. So it smells really good, and it's summertime, and it's not too hot.
That will be their biggest win if they can manage that. If they can stop pissing and shitting on streets.
Well, Paris has now you can swim in the canal actually, which is cool. Not the Seine itself, but you can swim in the canal. So they're cleaning stuff up. It has the natural fragrance of all the boulangeries and bakeries, patisseries and stuff, which is just always delicious. Yeah. So overall, I'd say the experience is just great right now.
I'm sold.
We'll see. Well, it's only day 3 or whatnot, so there's still a ways to go. But overall, I think I'm very happy here. I'm glad I was able to make it.
So that wraps our conversation on the 2024 Paris Olympics. If you're listening and haven't followed the Most Pondered podcast, we would really appreciate it if you could, wherever you're listening. It really, really helps. We're hard at work on our sustainability season, which should be coming out in the next few weeks. We try to publish every Monday, so if you follow, you'll be first to know. And as always, thank you for listening.